We continue with the campaign in southern Cadia. I've taken a picture of the old map I drew for this segment of the game and uploaded it here. Bear in mind my artistic talents are roughly equivalent to a third grader with poor hand-eye coordination. Double lines are Castellane roads, single lines are rivers, and dotted lines are Cadian roads. Gray shading is forest, lumps are hills, etc. Okay, let's begin. On the road to Castle Crowfield, a few other downtime activities are being conducted. Yoren has begun picking the brains of Ignis, Nate, and Jaspar, prodding them to pool their knowledge of engineering and siegecraft to see if they can design blueprints for a functional siege weapon. New siege weapons are incredibly rare, as even in the old Empire the full practical knowledge of how to build them has begun to fade. The three siege engineers discuss methods extensively, and write up various equations and theory crafting. Yoren struggles to keep up, though he is woefully undereducated in this field. Over time, they begin building prototype components, gears, winches, trigger mechanisms, etc. Agrippa, meanwhile, has begun nagging all of Steelshod into improving their dietary and hygiene habits. He has an ability called Healthy Living. If allies can make a weekly will save, then they get a small HP boost. Most members of Steelshod get on board with Agrippa after he clucks his tongue at them and scolds them for the nth time. Alexander has asked him to speak with Varley, and see if there's anything that can be done to help the old man with his declining health. Agrippa does so, and he begins Varley on a careful regimen of exercise and monitored diet. Varley is a little skeptical, but willing to try anything that might reduce his aches and growing infirmity. Just a day outside Crowfield, their small army walks into an ambush. The road cuts through shallow hills on either side, each with heavy tree cover from pine groves. The initial scouting sweep fails to notice anything serious, but once the column is between the two hills, the attack begins. A flurry of arrows showers them from the pine cover. The rain of fire isn't actually all that dense, but it's highly precise. Each shot is well targeted, and each arrow is huge, almost the size of a small javelin. They punch through mail and knock men off their horses. Steelshod and the Dusk Riders wheel around and ride up the shallow slopes, hoping to engage the archers. It quickly becomes apparent the archers are high in the tall pine trees, with good cover and an awkward shooting angle for those below. Much of the infantry split off from the column as well, forming up to move up whichever hill needs to be reinforced. The rest take cover behind supply wagons. As the forces split, a small horde of Krigar Reavers charge from behind the column, sweeping in with the goal of burning the supply wagons. A fight on three fronts. Tense, at least one close call as a Krigar charges straight for the spot where Jaspar is cowering in the shadows of a wagon. Jaspar takes aim with a crossbow and manages to plant a bolt between the Krigar's eyes mere seconds before he reached melee. Saved from more by Agrippa and Hubert. Bertram the Bold and Varley manage to mount a coherent defense of the wagons in short order, and the Krigars are driven back. The riders end up retreating to defend the wagons, and by the time they re-engage, the shooters from the trees are gone. But they killed a few of their number. The corpses of the shooters are new. Huge, hulking figures, easily identified as Berserks, but there's something different. Still huge for men, but smaller overall than the Berserks seen so far. A bit leaner, and the bearskins they wore range from dark brown to pitch black. Gunnar identifies them as Vartror, black bearskin Berserks, known for stealth, archery, and brutal close-quarters fighting. Terbjonson's assassins. The column suffered relatively light casualties all told. They press on to Crowfield and rendezvous with Wigglesworth in short order. Volk and Varley are immediately ushered into a war council. The Merc commanders, Alexander and Yoren, Bertram, Gwyneth, Sir Crispin, secure invites as well. The situation in the south is even more dire than the Marshal had heard. Reports indicate that Bjornsson himself is here, along with many of his elite personal champions. They've swept over the south of Cadia like a plague, and not just Cadia. Either Bjornsson or Hakon made landfall at one of Cadia's neighbors, an independent city-state along a coastal bay called Stanmouth. By all accounts, Stanmouth fell swiftly. The noble family put to the sword. Shortly after, another southern neighbor, a small Middish kingdom called Dinham, followed suit. Though an independent kingdom, Dinham is little more than a fertile valley with natural barriers in all but 2 places. Castellane forts defend the 2 entrances. Most of the valley is peaceful farmland, almost idyllic. A major exporter of food and grains to the nearby Middish kingdoms, including Cadia. Dinham, apparently, fell even faster than Stanmouth. To make matters worse, reports indicate that when last sighted, Bjornsson's army had been massively filled out by huge numbers of conscripts from Dinham and Stanmouth. Even a number of knights and yeomen have been added to the Svardic lengths. Yoren and Alexander are unsurprised. They make sure the War Council knows about the Svardic priests and their ability to cloud minds. Volk's skepticism and coldness towards Steelshod has thawed somewhat during the journey, especially as they were exceedingly helpful in protecting the supply wagons during the last ambush. He advises they be listened to, and Varley concurs. Wigglesworth is less cold than Volk was, but he's not exactly a jokester. Certainly not as light-hearted as his name might have suggested. Remember, his name is just a good old-fashioned Tarathi name. Common, especially among those whose ancestors served in the Serpentes. Wigglesworth speaks in clipped tones, with a tenseness in his voice that's hard to do. Gotta tighten up your mouth, purse your lips a little, talk like you're trying to look like a picture of a Woolsmith smallmouth meme. But for all that apparent tense scowling attitude, he listens to Steelshod attentively. He suggests that if they have any reliable method of dispelling the Svardic enchantment, they should take whatever steps they can to do so. But in the meantime, they'll have to treat the Dinamites and Stannies as they would any other enemy fighter. Wigglesworth presents a map of the area, marking out the keeps Bjornsson is known to have already taken with red tokens. There's a lot of red. He plots out the course the army will need to take, and the areas they must scout. He points to the trade city of Kilchester as their primary focal point. One of the best fortified castles in the south, Kilchester was once a Castellane trading hub of considerable size. Stone outer walls, towers, a stone inner fortification, and supplementing defenses built of wood and crude Cadian stonework, right in the middle of a major Castellane road that connects to Dinham, Stanmouth, and the Cadian towns and castles on the coast. The Svards control the area west and east of Kilchester, so he hopes to beat them to the fort and use it as a major hardpoint, disruption of their supply lines, and staging ground for further assaults. The army will split into several columns in order to cover more ground and sweep the land between Crowfield and Kilchester. Wigglesworth intends to make contact with all the keeps in between, to ensure they are still under Cadian control, and then converge on Kilchester to make a stand. He believes Bjornsson will not be willing to let such a tough nut stay uncracked behind his battle lines, and won't travel north until Kilchester falls. The army moves out in short order. Wigglesworth sends the bulk of his force down the main Castellane road under Lord Volk's command. He plans on taking a smaller contingent to make contact with Dunmagna and reinforce or withdraw troops as needed, scout the edges of Dinham, and rejoin the main host at the crossroads on the border. The final group he sends due west, to stop at Braddock, and take the Cadian road to the small castle of Wielding. Get any reports and intelligence they can provide, then south to Kilchester. This group is put under the command of a promising young lordling named Preston Chatsworth, whose holdings of Chatsworth and Chipspool have already been taken. Varley is to accompany him, to provide field counsel as needed. Steelshod is attached to this group as well, in part because Wigglesworth has no desire to separate Varley from Agrippa. Even in just the few weeks of travel, Varley already claims to be feeling a bit more energetic. So, everyone has their planned courses. Blue is Wigglesworth, purple is Volk, and green is Chatsworth and Steelshod. Steelshod remain attached to the main army for the first few days of marching, eventually breaking off to stop by Braddock. They passed here on their way in, and nothing much has changed. They enjoy a night of sleep behind walls before striking out through the woods to Wielding. On the road, Kara and Amos spot signs of a large force moving through the area. Hundreds of men, maybe more. They double their pace to Wielding, concerned at what they might find when they arrive. Fortunately, the castle still stands. Castle is always used loosely in this world, but for Wielding, it's an especially generous term. Wielding is a simple wooden Motte and Bailey structure with no castling structures to speak of at all. Wooden outer walls, a shallow hill, and a wooden inner keep. The local lord, Haversam, had already sent most of his men when the banners were called. He himself is old and fat, and not fit to fight in a war. Steelshod, Chatsworth, and his knights all move inside the walls to garrison the castle. They begin scouting the nearby woods and foothills. They hear distant wolves howling, and a few times their scouts think they see movement in the trees. They stay in Wielding for another night, trying to gauge how much time should be spent here. That night, their decision is made for them. Firelights erupt in the nearby tree line, and Sephardic battle songs are sung. Figures are seen in the flame-cast shadows, massing in the tree line. Many of the figures tower above the others. Bearsarks. At least a dozen of them, it looks like. A chill wind blows, dampening not just heat, but the inner fire of the defenders. Chatsworth has a few score of knights and perhaps 200 footmen. Wielding's garrison numbered less than a quarter of that. The men grow nervous, restless. Even the horses begin to spook. Alexander feels a nervous fear flicker through his heart, and then a searing pain as his sword burns in its scabbard. It hurts. God, does it hurt. But as the pain burns through him, it sears away the fears as well. He warns his men that the fear is not real, but born of Sephardic sorcery. Yoren doesn't have a magic sword to protect him. He feels the fear worm its way into his heart. And he reacts the way he always does to things that scare him. He gets pissed. He climbs up onto the walls and stands in defiance of the massing Svards. A Vartror's arrow sails towards him, and he ducks it with a contemptuously small motion. This heartens the defenders a little. Hubert's resisted the fear better than most, with a good will save, and he begins speaking to the assembled defenders, calling on them to look at Alexander and Yoren, decrying the fear as barbarian magic that will crumble beneath the light and fury of Torath's will. Hubert's first tier was called Skeptical Preacher, and it lets him grant resistances to witchcraft and mind-affecting magic when he can speak to a crowd with either faith or logic. He uses it to the best possible effect here. No single action would have worked on its own, but between the three of them, the defenders hold together when the Svards and Krigars charge. The battle is short and bloody, Vartror shooting opportunistically from the tree line, at a far enough distance to reduce their lethality a fair bit. Several Bearsarks charge the wooden gates and begin battering them down with huge clubs and axes. Krigars and Sephardic warriors begin scaling the walls with ropes and crude ladders, formed from notching a single tall log. Amos, Ben, Kara, and the other archers position themselves on the walls and manage to kill a few Bearsarks before they even batter through the walls. But as more Krigars gain the top of the wall, the archers become embroiled in melee. Lucky for them, no one in Steelshod is a true one-trick pony. Even a dedicated longbowman like Ben is still, at the end of the day, a man who shoots not with dexterity, but with strength. With monstrously broad shoulders, and a heavy maul as the customary backup weapon for most Cadian longbowmen. Chatsworth loses many of his men when the Bearsarks breach the gate, and Alexander leads a charge against them, deploying every leadership ability and tier in his arsenal to bolster the defenders and wreak holy havoc upon the enemy. Backed by Leon, Gunnar, Bear, and Steelshod's other heavy hitters, Alexander cuts through the Bearsarks in a vicious charge that leaves both attacker and defender bloodied and battered. The wall is nearly overrun, but Yoren goes all out in a flurry of blades. He throws an alchemical firepot that Hubert gave him, immolating several Svards as they gain the top, and, after a series of phenomenal defensive rolls, deflects 3 well-shot Fartror arrows with a whirlwind of sword and dagger. As he sends the last arrow skittering away a fraction of a second before it would have pierced his chest, he cries out a challenge to the priests, who are still hiding beyond the trees, chanting and trying to weave their spell of fear over the keep. As if to punctuate his challenge, Alexander and the mounted corps of Steelshod charge out of the mangled gate. They smash the invaders that were, only seconds before, clamoring to get into the keep. The chanting stops. The arrows stop. The firelights in the trees are promptly doused. And the remnants of the Kriegars and Svards break utterly, fleeing for the trees. The battle was hard fought, and won. The truth is, the defenders weren't significantly outnumbered. The Svards were counting on using the priest's fear and the overwhelming destructive capability of the Bearsarks to achieve a blitzkrieg victory. Steelshod stays in Wielding for a bit longer, patching up their wounds, helping to repair the main gate, and scouting for any sign of lingering Svards. Before too long, however, they head out again. They're late for their rendezvous. And if the Svards have already come this far north, who knows what's waiting for them at Kilchester. Thank you for tuning in to Steelshod, a series by Mostly Rights, narrated by Tailforge. You can find every chapter in text format, as well as character sheets, setting information, maps, and rule documents on the Steelshod tabletop system in the link below. If you'd like to support the channel, you can pop down to the description and use the Patreon link for recurring donations, the paypal.me link for one-time donations, the Teespring link for shirts with the incredibly cool background art by Nobody, or use the DriveThruRPG affiliate link the next time you're looking to try a new system. If you'd like to support the author, you can find Steelshod merch on the mostlyrights.com store, or donate to the Mostly Rights Patreon, which are both linked on reddit.com/r/mostlyrights down below.